10 most inbred women in history. Behind every statistic and medical record lies a real story. A life, a struggle, a woman carrying the true burden of arranged marriages. For centuries, these women paid the highest price for political alliances and the obsession with pure bloodlines. Their pain, too often hidden, shaped history. Let's begin with one of the most unforgettable names in this haunting legacy. Maria Antonia of Austria. When it comes to royal inbreeding, the name Maria Antonia is often the first that comes to mind. Born into one of Europe's most powerful but dangerously intertwined dynasties, the Habsburgs. Her father was Emperor Leopold I. Her mother? Margaret Theresa. On the surface, it might sound like a typical royal pairing, but here's the unsettling truth. Her parents were uncle and niece. Yes, you heard that right. And her mother even called her husband uncle in their letters. Something that might sound bizarre today, but was all too common in the Habsburg family. The Habsburgs had a long history of marrying close relatives in order to keep power consolidated. But this came at a steep genetic price. Generations of inbreeding led to a shocking outcome. Maria Antonia carried the highest inbreeding coefficient in the entire Habsburg lineage. In fact, her level of inbreeding was even higher than what you'd expect in children born to siblings. That's how extreme it got. Strangely enough, despite this deeply tangled gene pool, Maria Antonia was born looking healthy. She didn't seem to suffer from the physical deformities that haunted so many Habsburg descendants. Her mother died young, just 21 years old, and of her parents' 4 children, Maria Antonia was the only one who even made it past childhood. That in itself was a small miracle. As she grew, so did the weight of royal expectations. She was seen as a possible heir to both the Austrian and Spanish thrones. Why Spain? Because her other uncle, King Charles II of Spain, was in such poor physical condition, mentally and physically, that he couldn't produce an heir. In fact, when Maria Antonia was only 6 years old, there was a serious attempt to marry her off to that very uncle. Thankfully, that disturbing plan never came to pass. Instead, she eventually married Maximilian II of Bavaria. But this marriage was far from a fairy tale. By most accounts, it was a cold, unhappy union filled with heartache. Maria Antonia suffered a string of painful miscarriages, and when she finally did carry to term, her babies didn't survive long. She lost 2 sons shortly after birth, an all too possible echo of the genetic weaknesses passed down through generations. Then finally, a moment of joy, the birth of a healthy son, Joseph Ferdinand. This boy was seen as a beacon of hope, not just for Maria Antonia, but for Europe. Many believed he could unite Austria and Spain and bring stability to the region. But fate, once again, was cruel. At just 23 years old, Maria Antonia died from a postpartum infection. And not long after, her young son, her last and only hope, died suddenly of smallpox at the age of 7. With their deaths, the fragile balance of power in Europe crumbled, leading to the brutal War of the Spanish Succession, a conflict that would redraw the continent's political map. Isabella II of Spain. Now let's turn to another tragic royal, Isabella II of Spain, born in 1830. Her story begins in the shadow of family entanglements that would haunt her entire life. Her father was King Ferdinand VII, and her mother? His own niece. That's right. Isabella was the child of an uncle-niece union, one of the closest and most genetically risky pairings in royal history. But the cycle didn't stop there. As a young woman, Isabella was married off to her second cousin, continuing the long-standing tradition of keeping royal bloodlines tightly sealed within the family. Her personal life was marked by heartbreak. Though she endured 11 pregnancies, only 5 of her children survived past childhood. That tragically high child mortality rate might well reflect the devastating effects of centuries of inbreeding. Her reign wasn't easy either. Political unrest plagued her rule, and eventually she was overthrown in a revolution, losing not just her crown, but the crumbling legacy of a dynasty built on dangerously close blood ties. Cleopatra VII. When we talk about the most powerful women in ancient history, Cleopatra VII is a name that always commands attention. She was the last active pharaoh of ancient Egypt, known for her intelligence, beauty, and dramatic love affairs. But there's something most people don't know. Cleopatra was also the result of generations of extreme inbreeding. She belonged to the Ptolemaic dynasty, a royal Greek family that ruled Egypt after Alexander the Great's conquest. The Ptolemies weren't just obsessed with power, they were determined to keep it in the family. And their way of doing that was shocking by today's standards. They married their own siblings. Cleopatra followed that tradition. She married both of her younger brothers, first Ptolemy XIII, then, after his death, Ptolemy XIV. These were not love matches. They were political arrangements meant to solidify her claim to the throne. But genetically, it meant Cleopatra and her husbands shared nearly identical DNA. Some experts believe Cleopatra had a very high inbreeding coefficient, close to what we see in the offspring of full siblings. Members of the Ptolemaic family often showed signs of genetic weakness, like obesity, short lifespans, and mental instability. But Cleopatra seemed to escape the worst of it. Some scholars think earlier generations might have introduced a bit of outside blood. Others believe Cleopatra simply got lucky. Still, her story wasn't without ruthlessness. When her brothers threatened her rule, Cleopatra acted decisively. She didn't just outmaneuver them, she had them eliminated. That's how serious the fight for power was. In ancient Egypt, being queen meant doing whatever it took to survive. Later, though, Cleopatra made a bold move. She stepped outside her family line. Instead of marrying another relative, she had children with two of Rome's most powerful men, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. This wasn't just romance, it was strategy. Was she trying to strengthen her dynasty by introducing fresh blood into her lineage? Possibly. Maybe she'd learned from the downfall of her own family line. Maria I of Portugal. Now let's turn to the haunting story of Queen Maria of I of Portugal, a monarch remembered for two painful legacies: royal madness and royal inbreeding. As the direct heir to the throne, Maria was expected to keep the bloodline purely Portuguese. So, in a move driven more by politics than love, she married her own uncle, continuing the pattern of dangerously close royal unions. The result? Heartbreaking consequences. Several of Maria's children died young, likely due to genetic complications tied directly to inbreeding. The emotional toll alone would be enough to break anyone, but there was more. Maria herself began showing signs of severe mental illness, and over time her condition worsened dramatically. While personal tragedies, like the deaths of her husband and children, and world-shaking events like the French Revolution and Napoleon's invasion played a role in her decline, many historians believe that inherited vulnerabilities from her family's incestuous history may have triggered or amplified her mental deterioration. Mary Louise Elizabeth of Orléans. Mary Louise Elizabeth of Orléans is yet another heartbreaking example of the toll royal inbreeding could take. Not just on bodies, but on entire lives. Her story began with an already tangled and troubled union. Her father, Philippe II, Duke of Orléans, was pressured into marrying his cousin, the illegitimate daughter of King Louis XIV. It was a deeply unhappy marriage, but from it came several children. Mary Louise was the oldest daughter to survive, though the cracks in the royal bloodline were already showing. But the cycle didn't end there. Mary Louise was married off, again against her wishes, to yet another cousin, Prince Charles of Berry. This union brought her 3 pregnancies. Tragically, all 3 of her children died in infancy. Historians continue to debate the cause. Some point to the devastating effects of inbreeding, while others cite Mary Louise's alcoholism, which reportedly began as early as age 14. Either way, her life paints a sorrowful picture of how royalty often paid the highest price for their own lineage. Mary Louise of Austria. Mary Louise of Austria came into the world tangled in one of Europe's most tightly woven family trees. Her parents weren't just cousins, they were double first cousins, meaning both her mother's and father's families were deeply intertwined. Because of this, Mary Louise had only 4 unique great-grandparents instead of the typical 8. That's how closely her bloodline had folded in on itself. She was the eldest of 12 children, but heartbreak was a constant companion. Only 7 of her siblings survived to adulthood, a tragic pattern often seen in families marked by repeated inbreeding. At just 18 years old, Mary Louise was forced into one of the most surprising political marriages in history. She became the wife of Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who had once been her father's bitter enemy. There was no love here, only strategy. For Austria, it was about peace. For Napoleon, it was about securing an heir. For Mary Louise, it was yet another moment where power, politics, and too close for comfort bloodlines dictated her fate. Princess Alexia of Greece. Princess Alexia of Greece may come from a more recent generation of royalty, but her family tree is anything but modern. In fact, she and her 4 siblings were born from one of the last truly dynastic royal unions, the kind that connected 2 thrones, but also, unfortunately, 2 closely related bloodlines. Her parents, King Constantine II of Greece and Princess Anne-Marie of Denmark, were married in 1964 in what was considered a genuine love match. But beneath the romance, the couple shared not 1, but 2 family ties. They were both second cousins and third cousins, twice over. Let's break that down. Constantine's grandfather, King George IV of Greece, was the brother of Anne-Marie's grandfather, Frederick VIII of Denmark. That's the first link. But both also descended from Queen Victoria, creating yet another family overlap. And it doesn't stop there. Constantine had 2 great-grandparents who were siblings, and even more astonishingly, his grandmother and great-grandfather were brother and sister. Anne-Marie's lineage was just as twisted. Her great-grandparents were siblings as well. Even though their marriage was rooted in real affection, it still bore the genetic marks of centuries of royal inbreeding, much like the union between Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. Which royal story shocked you the most, and why? Mummies 317A and 317B. Now here's a haunting story from the depths of ancient Egypt, one that most people have never heard of. Meet Mummies 317A and 317B, the delicate remains of 2 infant girls who lived and died more than 3,000 years ago. What makes them so historically significant isn't just that they were royal, but who their parents were. Their father was Pharaoh Tutankhamun, one of the most famous rulers in Egyptian history, but their mother? She was Ankhesenamun, Tutankhamun's full sister. That's right, both were children of the controversial pharaoh Akhenaten. While it's still debated whether Nefertiti was Tutankhamun's biological mother, she was certainly Ankhesenamun's. This means these baby girls were the product of a full sibling union, a level of inbreeding that dramatically increases the risk of genetic defects. Tragically, neither girl survived past infancy. Whether they were stillborn or died shortly after birth, the odds were stacked against them from the start. Their short, silent lives stand as a heartbreaking symbol of how the royal obsession with keeping bloodlines pure often ended not in glory, but in grief. Loren, Whitaker, and Kimberly cults. Do you ever think that stories of inbreeding, of impure bloodlines and genetic tragedies are just relics from a distant past, confined to ancient palaces and dusty history books? Do these painful issues still exist somewhere in the modern world we live in? Sadly, the answer is yes. Inbreeding is not just a ghost of old royal history. It still exists today, often hidden within relatively isolated communities, groups of people living in seclusion, sometimes due to geography, sometimes due to beliefs or social barriers. Unlike royal figures such as Isabella or Mary Louise, Loren Whitaker is a product of modern rural America. Her story proves that inbreeding is not just a relic of the past. It still happens, even outside royal bloodlines. Loren was born into the notorious Whitaker family, known for their extreme genetic isolation over many generations. And among them, Loren stood out as one of the most inbred individuals. She later became the mother of Timmy Whitaker, who is often considered one of the most severely genetically affected individuals alive today. Her life and Timmy's have highlighted the heartbreaking consequences of long-term inbreeding in isolated communities. And now, let's talk about someone who might just be the most inbred person alive on Earth. Though we'll call her Kimberly Cults to protect her true identity. That's not her real name, but she is a real individual. And her story is one of the most disturbing modern examples of extreme inbreeding. Kimberly came from an isolated cult-like family in rural Australia, a family now widely known for their horrific behavior. In the 2010s, police discovered shocking conditions within the family, including rampant abuse and severe neglect. Many family members were arrested and later imprisoned for crimes that were both illegal and inhumane. Genetic testing later revealed the extent of Kimberly's inbreeding. Her DNA showed some of the most extreme signs of inbreeding ever recorded. Her case is not just rare, it's unprecedented in modern times and serves as a profound reminder that inbreeding still has real consequences to this day. Why did they do it? After hearing all these stories, it's only natural to ask, why? Why would so many powerful families, generation after generation, deliberately marry their own relatives? Especially when, across most cultures and religions, marrying close kin has always been considered taboo or even forbidden? Well, the truth is both practical and unsettling. For most royal families, it all came down to three things: power, wealth, and control. These rulers weren't just trying to protect their family fortunes, they were trying to lock down entire empires, ensuring that no outsider could take what they saw as rightfully theirs. Think of it like running a massive family business. You don't want strangers stepping in and taking over. But instead of a store or a company, they were guarding thrones, armies, and entire nations. There was also a deep belief in their own superiority. Many royals truly thought they were different, not just socially, but spiritually. Some claimed their blood was divinely chosen, and marrying a commoner would dilute their sacred bloodline. It wasn't just about status, it was about keeping the purity of their lineage untouched by those they saw as beneath them. On a larger scale, politics played a major role too. Marriages between royal houses weren't always romantic. They were treaties in disguise. A marriage between a Spanish princess and an Austrian archduke could help avoid war or solve a bitter inheritance dispute without bloodshed. These alliances were often seen as the safest path to peace and stability, at least in theory. And then there's the most pressing reason of all: producing an heir. For a monarchy to survive, the royal line needed to continue. If a king died without a clear successor, it could lead to civil war or foreign invasion. So, families did everything they could to ensure their children were born with the right blood, even if that meant marrying close relatives. But as we've seen throughout history, that strategy came at a devastating cost. The more these families intermarried, the narrower their gene pool became. Picture genetics like a massive book full of instructions. Everyone carries a few typos, harmful recessive genes. Normally, when two unrelated people have children, the chances of both carrying the same harmful gene are very small. But when two relatives marry, especially cousins or worse, uncle and niece, those chances skyrocket. And when both parents carry the same harmful gene, that gene gets expressed. That's when disease, deformity, and mental illness begin to appear and repeat across generations. In trying so hard to keep everything in the family, these royal bloodlines paid a heavy price, one written into the bodies and minds of their own children. Do you think power was worth the terrible genetic cost these families paid? Horrifying health consequences. Yes, the attempt to keep royal bloodlines pure may have seemed like a wise political move at the time, but history shows us just how devastating that decision turned out to be. The cost wasn't just symbolic or spiritual, it was physical, emotional, and generational. And nowhere was that price more painfully obvious than in the broken health and tragic lives of the royals themselves. One of the most heartbreaking and consistent consequences of inbreeding was infertility and miscarriage. These issues haunted royal couples throughout history, especially women, who were often blamed, wrongly, for failing to produce an heir. Take Queen Anne of England, for example. Her story is a study in maternal sorrow. She endured 17 pregnancies in her lifetime. That's 17 hopes, 17 names, 17 chances to secure the throne. And yet, only one child survived infancy, and even he died as a teenager. Anne's parents had been first cousins, and Anne herself married a second cousin. Today, many believe this repeated inbreeding likely played a significant role in her fertility struggles. And she wasn't alone. Mary, Queen of Scots, is another tragic case. She also endured multiple miscarriages and stillbirths. The emotional weight of losing child after child, combined with the pressure to produce a royal heir, created a constant storm of sorrow for women like her. Modern genetic studies have helped us understand why this happened. For instance, researchers looking into the Habsburg dynasty, one of the most heavily inbred royal lines in Europe, discovered a horrifying trend. The more inbred the woman, the higher her risk of dying shortly after childbirth. In fact, records suggest that around 20% of highly inbred royal women died within just 4 weeks of giving birth. Even when they did survive childbirth, the pregnancies were often spaced far apart. Not because they didn't want more children, but because their bodies couldn't handle the physical toll. And yet, due to political expectations, they were pushed to try again and again. But reproductive issues weren't the only side effects. Some of the most famous genetic diseases in royal history can be directly linked to inbreeding. Let's start with the one you've probably heard of: hemophilia, often called the royal disease. Queen Victoria of England, who ruled from 1837 to 1901, unknowingly carried the mutated gene for hemophilia. She passed it on to her son, Prince Leopold, who suffered from the condition and died young. She also passed it to her daughters, who then married into other European royal families, carrying the gene with them. Thanks to these intermarriages, hemophilia spread across the royal houses of Russia, Spain, and Germany. The condition itself is terrifying. People with hemophilia don't clot blood properly. That means even small injuries, like a bump or a minor cut, can cause internal bleeding or death. The most tragic case of all may be Tsarevich Alexei, the only son of Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia. He inherited hemophilia from his mother Alexandra, Queen Victoria's granddaughter. His condition was kept secret from the public, but it dominated the royal family's life. In desperation, the Tsarina turned to Rasputin, a mysterious monk who she believed could heal Alexei. That decision, placing their trust in Rasputin, sparked outrage among Russian nobles and the public. Many historians believe this dependence on Rasputin helped fuel the Russian Revolution of 1917, which led to the execution of the entire Romanov family. In a very real way, a single genetic disease helped bring down a royal empire. But hemophilia wasn't the only condition tied to royal bloodlines. There's also porphyria, another genetic disorder believed to have afflicted King George III of England, the same king the American colonies rebelled against. Porphyria affects the body's ability to make heme, a component of blood. Its symptoms are disturbing: intense abdominal pain, hallucinations, mental confusion, and hypersensitivity to sunlight. Some even report urine turning the color of dark wine. For years, many believed George III's so-called madness was just political propaganda. But modern DNA studies, including testing of Princess Charlotte, one of his descendants, confirmed the presence of the porphyria gene mutation. It wasn't madness, it was a genetic illness, likely made worse by generations of consanguineous marriage. There are more examples. The Tudor dynasty, particularly King Henry VIII, showed signs of physical anomalies too. Henry was known for his large jaw, a trait that became more exaggerated with age. Some scholars believe this facial trait, along with his other health issues, could be linked to the limited genetic diversity in his royal ancestry. Then we have the infamous Habsburg jaw, a physical deformity that became the hallmark of the Spanish Habsburgs. This distinctive look included a protruding lower jaw, bulging lips, and an overly elongated nose. It wasn't just an odd family resemblance, it was a genetic disorder passed down through uncle-niece marriages for generations. The most extreme case was King Charles II of Spain. Genetically, he had an inbreeding coefficient so high, it was the same as a child born from a brother and sister. He was born with numerous physical and intellectual disabilities. He struggled to speak, had digestive disorders, developmental delays, and was likely infertile. His autopsy, though likely exaggerated, claimed his heart was the size of a peppercorn, his lungs were decayed, and his testicle was black as coal. Despite all this, Charles II lived to 39, but he left behind no heir, and with his death came the end of the Spanish Habsburg line. That power vacuum triggered the War of the Spanish Succession, a brutal conflict that reshaped Europe's borders for generations. And these effects weren't limited to the Habsburgs. King Edward VI, son of Henry VIII, suffered chronic respiratory problems and died at just 15. Many historians suspect that his weakened immune system, likely the result of inbreeding, played a role in his early death. Even psychological issues have been linked to royal bloodlines. King James II of England is thought to have passed on a predisposition to mental instability to his descendants. Similarly, King Ludwig II of Bavaria, famous for his fairy tale castles, exhibited erratic behavior and may have suffered from hereditary mental illness. The Hanover dynasty also experienced multiple genetic disorders. Beyond porphyria, there are signs they struggled with issues like gout, pulmonary embolism, and other chronic conditions. Ferdinand I of Austria, whose parents were first cousins, was born with hydrocephalus, had seizures, difficulty speaking, and likely suffered from a form of intellectual disability. Thank you for watching. To continue with more content, comment yes to let us know you're still following. Broader consequences, the downfall of dynasties. The personal stories we've heard so far of pain, illness, and tragic loss are heartbreaking on their own. But the consequences of royal inbreeding didn't end with individuals or even families. In many cases, they spread far beyond the palace walls, contributing to the collapse of entire dynasties and even changing the course of world history. When a monarch suffers from serious illness, whether physical, mental, or genetic, or fails to produce a healthy heir, the result is often political instability. The strength of a kingdom relies heavily on the strength of its ruler, and when the ruler is weak or unfit, the whole system starts to wobble. Let's go back to King George III of England, who we now believe suffered from porphyria, a painful and mentally destabilizing disease. During his episodes of confusion and erratic behavior, he was unable to govern, creating long stretches of political limbo. Some historians argue that this uncertainty within the monarchy helped create the environment that fueled unrest in the American colonies, possibly playing a part in sparking the American Revolution. Then there's the deeply tragic case of Tsarevich Alexei, the only son of Russia's last Tsar, Nicholas II. His battle with hemophilia, a result of royal intermarriage, forced his desperate parents to rely on Rasputin, a self-proclaimed holy man with no formal power but enormous influence. That reliance eroded public trust in the monarchy and helped light the fire of the 1917 Russian Revolution, which ended with the brutal execution of the entire Romanov family. And we can't forget King Charles II of Spain, perhaps the most tragic example of the long-term effects of inbreeding. Born with severe deformities, intellectual disabilities, and completely unable to father a child, Charles's death marked the end of the Spanish Habsburg line. That void of power led directly to the War of the Spanish Succession, a major European conflict that would redraw the map and shift the balance of power across the continent. In all these cases, the damage wasn't just personal, it was political, national, and global. Generations of inbreeding had gradually weakened royal bodies and minds, creating fragile rulers and uncertain futures. Without strong leadership or clear heirs, dynasties crumbled, not by war or rebellion alone, but by the slow decay from within. And this wasn't limited to Europe. Ancient civilizations, Egypt, Peru, Hawaii, all practiced close-kin marriage among elites. At first, it was about keeping power in the family, but over time, the genetic toll became impossible to ignore. Does incest still exist today? At this point, you might be thinking, surely all of this must be ancient history, right? Stories of royal incest, genetic diseases, and tragic heirs feel like they belong in dusty textbooks and forgotten palaces. But here's the unsettling truth. It's not just history, it still happens. Yes, even today, in our modern world, incest and close relative marriages continue to exist. And not just in far-off places, but in parts of the world you might not expect. It doesn't always look like the carefully arranged marriages of medieval kings and queens. In many cases, incest is found within isolated communities, places that are physically cut off by geography, or socially closed off by deep cultural, religious, or ideological beliefs. Just like ancient royals married relatives to keep power, wealth, and bloodlines pure, some modern communities prioritize keeping marriage and relationships within their own group. Sometimes it's about tradition, sometimes mistrust of outsiders. Sometimes it's simply what happens when people live in isolation for generations. But regardless of the reason, the consequences are strikingly familiar and often heartbreaking. When people from the same small gene pool continue to marry and have children together, the genetic diversity of the group shrinks. And as that gene pool narrows, the chances increase that two people carry the same harmful recessive gene, the kind that would normally remain hidden if mixed with unrelated DNA. When those two genes meet, the result can be devastating. We've already seen it happen in royal families: high rates of miscarriage, infertility, hemophilia, porphyria, facial deformities like the Habsburg jaw, and countless mental and developmental disorders. But this isn't just ancient history. Science today confirms these risks still apply. In modern studies, whether historical population records from Sweden or real-life case studies from rural areas in the United States and Australia, researchers have observed how inbreeding can lead to a higher risk of congenital birth defects, increased rates of infant mortality and stillbirths, lower fertility and shorter life expectancy, and a much greater likelihood of severe mental and physical disabilities. Take the Whitaker family of West Virginia, for example, a modern case of extreme inbreeding that resulted in multiple generations with severe cognitive impairments. Or the Colt family in rural Australia, whose children were born with rare and serious health conditions. Then there's the FLDS community in Short Creek and the Kingston family in Utah, where isolation and intermarriage led to a troubling rise in genetic disorders. These aren't just numbers or headlines. These are real people, often born into situations they didn't choose. Children growing up with physical and mental challenges they'll carry for life. Families dealing with stigma, poverty, and isolation. These stories deserve not only awareness, but compassion. And most importantly, they show us a simple but vital truth. Genetic diversity matters. So when people from different families, backgrounds, and gene pools have children together, the chances of harmful recessive genes combining drop dramatically. In other words, genetic mixing protects future generations. It's nature's way of keeping us healthy, adaptable, and strong. So, yes, incest and inbreeding still happen in the world today. But by understanding the science, acknowledging the pain, and advocating for education and support, we can begin to address the problem, not with judgment, but with compassion. Because behind every gene is a human life. History's most tragic giant. They were giants in every sense, admired, stared at, even worshipped. Anna Haining Bates once stood before Queen Victoria. Andre the Giant filled stadiums with roaring fans. But behind their towering fame were lives marked by pain, loneliness, and loss. This is the untold story of two extraordinary people who seemed larger than life, but couldn't escape the weight of it. Andre the Giant. You've probably heard of legends in the world of wrestling: Hulk Hogan, Macho Man, Randy Savage, maybe even Ric Flair. But there was one man who stood above them all, literally and figuratively. Andre the Giant wasn't just a wrestler, he was a phenomenon. They called him the eighth wonder of the world, and not just as a gimmick. He could drink 156 beers in one night, lift a car off the ground with his bare hands, and draw crowds by the thousands just by showing up. But behind the myth was a man, a real man, who lived in constant pain, struggled to fit into a world built for average-sized people, and quietly carried the burden of being too big for almost everything. A giant is born. André René Roussimoff was born on May 19, 1946, in the small countryside town of Coulommiers, France. His family lived a simple, hard-working life on a farm, never imagining that one of their 5 children would become a global sensation. But from the start, André stood out, literally. He weighed nearly 13 pounds at birth, already bigger than most newborns. As he grew, it became clear that something was different. By age 12, André stood at a staggering 6 feet 3 inches tall, towering over teachers and classmates alike. And this wasn't just a growth spurt, it was the beginning of a lifelong transformation. At 14, when compulsory education ended in France, André left school to work on the family farm. He later took a job at a local factory, doing his part like any other young man in rural France. But his body wasn't done growing. By the time he reached adulthood, André measured an unbelievable 7 feet 4 inches tall and weighed over 500 pounds. He wasn't just tall, he was massive, with hands like catcher's mitts and a voice that rumbled like thunder. Even everyday things like finding clothes or walking through doorways became challenges. When he turned 17 and was summoned for military service, the army quickly realized they weren't equipped to handle someone like André. No uniform fit, no boots came close, and even the bunk beds couldn't support his size. So, in a rare move, the government excused him from service. It was one of the first times André's sheer size bent the rules of the world around him, but it wouldn't be the last. Discovery in Paris? At 18, André left the quiet life of the farm behind and moved to Paris, hoping to find work and maybe a new path. What he found instead was destiny. While working construction jobs to make ends meet, his immense size drew constant attention. None more important than from a local wrestling promoter who took one look at André and saw a gold mine. He convinced the young man to step into the ring, not just as a novelty, but as a spectacle. That's when André adopted the name Géant Ferré, based on a mythical French giant from folklore. It wasn't long before André was traveling across Europe, wrestling in packed halls and sports arenas in Germany, the United Kingdom, and eventually Japan and Canada. In every country, the reaction was the same. Audiences couldn't believe their eyes. Wrestling promoters began billing him as the Roussimoff Monster, and he delivered on that title, tossing opponents like rag dolls and drawing standing ovations everywhere he went. But André wasn't just big, he was quick on his feet, shockingly agile for a man of his size. In the ring, he moved with purpose and surprising grace, giving performances that blurred the line between strength and showmanship. Though he was still years away from becoming a household name, the groundwork was being laid. What started as a way to make money turned into a career that would soon take him to North America and into the history books. Strength, respect, and a few broken ribs. In the world of wrestling, matches may be scripted, but André's strength was anything but pretend. Inside the ring, he didn't just perform, he commanded respect. And while most wrestlers played by the rules, everyone knew that if André didn't like you, he could make your night very real very quickly. He had a gentle nature, yes, but cross him, and you'd feel the full force of the giant. There's a famous story involving real-life boxer Chuck Wepner, the same man who inspired Rocky. In a special match, Wepner threw legitimate punches, but they barely fazed André. Finally, when André had enough, he scooped the heavyweight boxer up like a sack of laundry and tossed him over the ropes as if he were made of paper. The crowd roared, but that was no show. That was pure strength. And then there's the barroom story. André was having a quiet drink when a local tough guy decided to pick a fight. André tried to brush him off, even offering to buy the man a drink, but the guy wouldn't back down. Finally, without losing his cool, André stood up, lifted the man clear off the ground, and flung him across the room. The guy landed hard, broken ribs and all. The greatest drinker who ever lived. If André's strength made him a legend, His drinking made him a myth. Nearly every wrestler who traveled with him has a story, and they all sound too wild to be true. But the truth is, Andre the Giant could drink like no one else on Earth. It wasn't just a party trick, it was part of his routine, his way of coping, and maybe a bit of both. He reportedly consumed around 7,000 calories of alcohol a day. To stay warm in colder climates, he'd casually sip 2 bottles of vodka, like someone else might have a cup of tea. One night at the Tampa Airport's Delta Lounge, Andre sat down and drank 108 beers in a single sitting. Let that sink in. 108. That's more than 4 cases. For most people, that's fatal. For Andre, it was just Thursday. It didn't stop there. During a hotel stay in England, he racked up a $40,000 bar tab over the course of a month. On a trip to Japan, he polished off 12 bottles of French wine in 3 hours. And on a flight from Chicago to Tokyo, sitting next to Ric Flair, Andre drank every last bottle of vodka on the plane. On another trip, this one from Miami to Dayton, he and Hillbilly Jim went through 56 mini vodka bottles. Andre drank 50 of them. Before stepping into the ring, his pre-match ritual was equally astonishing. 6 bottles of Portuguese wine. Just to loosen up. One night, for his final round, Andre calmly ordered 40 shots of vodka, and the bartender stayed late to pour every last one. It was entertaining, sure, but underneath the laughs and disbelief, you could see the truth. Andre was drinking not just for fun, but to dull the pain that came with being a living giant in a world too small to hold him. Pain behind the fame. For all his strength, Andre lived in near constant pain. His condition, acromegaly, didn't just make him grow, it wore his body down from the inside out. By the time he was in his 30s, every movement was a struggle. His back ached, his knees throbbed. Even getting out of bed in the morning took effort, but Andre wasn't one to complain. He kept it to himself, smiled for the fans, and did the job. Still, the pain was real, and it was relentless. While filming The Princess Bride, a movie that introduced him to an entirely new generation, Andre's back was in such bad shape that he couldn't even hold his co-star Robin Wright, who weighed barely 110 pounds. For a key scene, a hidden rig had to be used just to make it look like she was in his arms. That's how much pain he was in. And in the ring, the giant who once moved with surprising speed and agility now appeared slower, more deliberate. The spark was still there, but his body was fading. His legendary match with Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 3 wasn't just a scripted passing of the torch. It was a real turning point, the beginning of the end for a man whose body had carried the weight of greatness for far too long. A gentle goodbye. In January 1993, Andre returned to France to attend his father's funeral. It was a somber trip, one that brought him back to the countryside where his story had begun. While staying in a Paris hotel, Andre passed away in his sleep. He was just 46 years old. The official cause of death was congestive heart failure. His massive heart, quite literally, could no longer keep up. The wrestling world was stunned but not surprised. Everyone knew Andre had been in pain. What many didn't realize was just how much he had quietly endured. Soon after, the WWE created its Hall of Fame, and Andre the Giant was the very first person to be inducted. What's your favorite memory of Andre the Giant? Were you lucky enough to see him live, or do you remember the first time you watched him on screen? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear them. Coming, Andre the Giant. Everything changed for Andre in 1971 when he met Vince McMahon Sr., the powerful promoter behind the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, what we now know as WWE. McMahon instantly recognized Andre's potential, but he also saw a need for reinvention. Up to that point, Andre had been marketed as a novelty, a giant sideshow attraction. But McMahon had a bigger vision. He advised Andre to slow down his wrestling style, to move deliberately to become not just a big man, but a living myth. And with that shift came a new name, Andre the Giant. It was simple, it was powerful, and it stuck. From that point on, the name Andre the Giant wasn't just a wrestling persona, it was a brand, a legend in the making. As his star rose, so did the demands on his body. Around this time, Andre was diagnosed with a rare condition called acromegaly, caused by an overactive pituitary gland that floods the body with growth hormone. It explained everything: his enormous hands, his deep voice, his towering frame. But it also came with a dark side: chronic pain, joint issues, and a shortened life expectancy. For Andre, the very thing that made him famous was also slowly wearing him down. Still, none of that slowed him yet. Andre embraced the spotlight. He didn't need a championship belt to prove his worth. His presence alone filled arenas. While other wrestlers built their reputation by winning titles, Andre didn't need them. He was the main event just by walking into the room. Everywhere he went, fans stood in awe. Andre the Giant wasn't just a wrestler anymore, he was a phenomenon, a walking wonder, and the face of a new era in professional wrestling. Life on the road, a giant's daily struggles. As Andre's fame exploded, so did his travel schedule. Back in the 1970s and 80s, professional wrestling wasn't the global empire it is today. It was regional, divided into territories, each with its own fan base and television broadcast. That worked in Andre's favor. Because there was no internet and limited national coverage, most people only saw him once. When Andre arrived in a new city, it felt like a once-in-a-lifetime event. Promoters booked him as a special attraction, someone who could fill an arena simply by stepping into the ring. But behind the curtain, Andre's life on the road was grueling. Airplanes, for example, were a nightmare. Andre couldn't fit into a standard seat, so he was forced to book 2 first-class tickets just to have enough space. Even then, his knees pressed into the seat in front of him, and using the airplane bathroom? Nearly impossible. Hotel beds were too short, showers too cramped, and toilets too fragile for his size. The world simply wasn't built for someone like Andre. And then there were the taxis, especially in Japan. Andre was so enormous that drivers were genuinely afraid of him. One time, he had to hide around the corner while another wrestler flagged down a cab. But when Andre stepped out to get in, the driver saw him, screamed, "No, no, no," and hit the gas. Without flinching, Andre calmly reached out and grabbed the rear bumper, holding the car in place like it was nothing. The driver wasn't going anywhere until Andre let go. That story became legend among wrestlers. For most people, travel meant freedom. For Andre, it was a constant reminder of just how different and how difficult his life really was. A dream dashed and a new path forward. Despite the crowds and the curiosity, Anna longed for something simple, something most people take for granted. She wanted to live a normal life. She doted on her younger siblings, helped with chores, and spent her free time reading and drawing. More than anything, Anna dreamed of becoming a teacher. She loved books, loved learning, and hoped one day to stand in front of a classroom, not as an object of fascination, but as a mentor. She even took a bold step toward that dream. As a teenager, she moved to another city to live with her aunt and attend school. But the dream didn't last. The classrooms were too cramped. The desks were impossible for her to use. Worse still were the stares and whispers from strangers on the streets, curious looks that made her feel like she didn't belong. Despite her determination, the message was clear. The world wasn't ready to accommodate a woman like Anna. It was a crushing blow, but she wasn't alone. One of her greatest sources of strength was her grandmother, a proud Highland Scot, who saw something powerful in her granddaughter. "Stand tall and be proud of your Highland ancestry," she told Anna. And somehow those words took root. They reminded Anna that her size wasn't a flaw, it was part of who she was. A blessing, a responsibility, a way to stand tall in more ways than one. With renewed strength, Anna began to look at her life differently. If she couldn't teach in a classroom, maybe she could educate people in other ways. If the world wouldn't stop staring, maybe she could give them something meaningful to look at. That shift in perspective would take her far from Nova Scotia and straight into the spotlight of one of the most famous showmen in history. The Nova Scotian giantess takes the stage. In 1862, Anna made a bold move. At just 16, she crossed the border into the United States to join P.T. Barnum's famed American Museum in New York City. There, she was billed as the Nova Scotian Giantess. An astonishing sight, to be sure, but Anna wasn't content to just be stared at. She saw the opportunity for what it really was, a platform, a chance to earn money, receive an education, and take back control of her story. And to Barnum's credit, the arrangement was surprisingly fair. Anna earned $23 a week in gold, a generous sum for the time, and she had a personal chaperone to ensure her safety. Even more impressively, she was allowed to sell photographs of herself and keep the profits. In a time when most women had little financial independence, Anna had carved out a rare space for herself, both as a professional and as a person. While working at the museum, Anna thrived. She received private tutoring, learned to play piano, improved her singing voice, and even took on dramatic roles on stage. She portrayed characters like Lady Macbeth, not just for spectacle, but with real performance skill. She also began holding question and answer sessions with museum audiences, sharing her life, her thoughts, and her humanity with those who came just to gawk. In doing so, she began to turn the tables. She wasn't just an exhibit anymore, she was a storyteller, a presence, a teacher in her own right. But in 1865, disaster struck. A massive fire engulfed Barnum's museum. Anna, weighing nearly 400 pounds and too tall for the windows, was trapped as the flames rose around her. With no escape route, panic set in, until 18 people working together carried her to safety. She was the last to make it out. She lost everything she owned, but she didn't leave until others had escaped first. In that moment, she wasn't just the Nova Scotian giantess, she was a hero, Anna Haining Bates. She was one of the tallest women to ever walk the earth. So tall, in fact, that strangers stopped in their tracks, children stared wide-eyed, and newspapers dubbed her the largest woman in the world. A giant child in a small world? Anna Haining Bates was born on August 6, 1846, in the quiet village of Millbrook, Nova Scotia. Her parents, Anne Graham and Alexander Swan, were Scottish immigrants trying to build a better life in the Canadian countryside. They had 12 other children, all perfectly average in size and stature. But Anna was different from the very beginning. Some say she was born an average baby. Others claim she weighed an astonishing 13 pounds at birth. Either way, it didn't take long for everyone to notice she wasn't like the others. By the time Anna was just 4 years old, she stood over 4 feet tall and weighed more than 90 pounds. And she didn't stop growing. At 15, she measured a staggering 7 feet tall. But Anna's size wasn't just a passing phase. She continued to grow beyond that, eventually reaching over 7.5 feet tall, making her one of the tallest women in recorded history. Although there was no formal diagnosis in her lifetime, we now know Anna most likely had gigantism, a rare condition caused by a tumor on the pituitary gland. This led to the overproduction of growth hormone, which explained her remarkable size, and the many health problems that came with it. She lived with constant strain on her joints, organs, and bones. And although the condition often shortens lifespans, Anna faced her challenges with a strength and gentleness that left a lasting impression on everyone she met. While the world saw her as a spectacle, her family saw her as a daughter and sister. Her father built her a custom bed and specially made school furniture. They did what they could to make her feel included in a world that wasn't built for her. But even their love couldn't shield her from what was coming next. Turned into a public attraction. As Anna's height continued to climb, so did public curiosity. Word spread quickly across Nova Scotia about the infant giantess, and before long people began showing up at the Bates family farm, just to catch a glimpse of her. Local newspapers ran stories about the remarkable young girl who towered over her peers. Some were respectful, others sensationalized her. But all of it made one thing clear. The public fascination with Anna wasn't going away. The Bates family, while deeply loving and protective, faced a difficult reality. Life on the farm wasn't easy, And Anna's size came with extra costs. Custom clothing, special shoes, and daily challenges that required creative solutions. So, out of both necessity and practicality, her parents made a hard decision. They began to take Anna to local fairs and exhibitions. There, she was shown to the public as a curiosity, an astonishing sight, a giantess from the Maritimes. It's a decision that sparked debate ever since. Some historians have criticized it as exploitative, while others see it as the only viable way for the family to support Anna and manage the financial burden her condition brought. But there's something important to remember. Anna was never left to fend for herself. Her parents accompanied her everywhere. They chose events carefully, staying away from anything shady or inappropriate. Wherever Anna went, her family was right there beside her, watching, guiding, and protecting. And through it all, Anna maintained a quiet grace. Even as people stared or whispered, she tried her best to smile, to answer questions kindly, and to carry herself with dignity. She was becoming more than a sideshow attraction. She was beginning to find her voice, even if the world hadn't learned to truly hear her yet. A quiet life after the spotlight. After the loss of their son, Anna and Martin turned away from the spotlight for good. The touring days, the public exhibitions, the performances, they all belonged to another life now. In the late 1870s, the couple focused instead on their farm in Seville, Ohio, pouring their time and energy into a quieter, more grounded existence. They became active members of their local Baptist church, where they found comfort in community and faith. Their home, once a place of wonder for curious visitors, became a haven of peace. And while the public's attention may have faded, their kindness never did. Anna and Martin were known throughout their town not just for their size, but for their generosity. One of Anna's greatest joys in this chapter of life was caring for animals. She was deeply compassionate toward creatures large and small. She opposed horse racing, believing it to be cruel, and took in rescued cattle and draft horses that had outlived their usefulness in the circus. She even adopted retired performing animals. One particularly mischievous monkey named Buttons became the subject of local legend for his antics with unsuspecting guests. Royalty, romance, and recognition. Anna's fame didn't stop with stage performances. Her grace, intelligence, and quiet charm caught the attention of people far beyond the world of show business, including royalty. During her travels through Europe, Anna formed an unlikely and heartfelt friendship with none other than Queen Victoria herself. The Queen, known for her interest in people who defied societal norms, found in Anna a kindred spirit, someone dignified, intelligent, and completely unforgettable. But that wasn't the only life-changing connection Anna would make. While visiting a circus in Halifax, she met Martin Van Buren Bates, a fellow giant who stood over 7 feet tall and weighed nearly 500 pounds. It was quite literally a meeting of equals. They understood each other in a way no one else could, sharing not only a profession but the daily challenges of living in a world not built for people their size. Their connection was instant, and their bond only deepened as they began touring together. In 1871, Anna and Martin were married in London, and their wedding quickly became international news. When Queen Victoria heard the news, she sent the couple an extraordinary gift, a custom-made wedding gown created from 100 meters of satin and 50 meters of lace, embroidered with orange blossoms. And that was just the beginning. The couple was invited to Buckingham Palace, where the Queen personally gifted Anna a beautiful diamond ring and presented Martin with a gold watch and chain. They would go on to visit the palace at least 2 more times, cementing their place in the Queen's circle of admired guests. After their wedding tour, the couple settled in Seville, Ohio, where they designed a home to suit their unique proportions: tall ceilings, wide doorways, and massive beds. But they didn't forget others. The back portion of the house was built to standard size for guests and servants, a thoughtful touch that showed Anna and Martin's deep kindness and consideration. They tried to live a life of peace and comfort away from the public eye. But as much as Anna had already endured and achieved, the most personal and painful chapter of her life was still to come. Tragedy of motherhood. After years of touring, performing, and living under the public eye, Anna and Martin longed for something far more private and precious, a family of their own. Like so many couples, they dreamed of raising children, of filling their custom-built home with laughter and life. But for Anna, those dreams would end in unimaginable sorrow. In 1872, Anna gave birth to a baby girl. The child weighed an incredible 18 pounds at birth, far larger than most newborns. Sadly, the infant passed away not long after. It was a crushing blow, but Anna, ever resilient, pressed forward. Still, the grief lingered quietly in the background, a wound that had never fully healed. 6 years later, hope returned. Anna was pregnant again, this time with a boy. But from the start, the pregnancy was difficult. She suffered complications, including a massive loss of amniotic fluid. Labor dragged on, grueling and dangerous. When the moment finally came, the attending doctor was faced with an impossible challenge. The baby was simply too large to deliver with forceps. In the end, a risky and painful method was used to bring the child into the world. The baby boy was born weighing 23 pounds, so large he looked like a 6-month-old. It was a medical marvel, and a tragic one. The child lived for just 11 hours before passing away in Anna's arms. Later, he would be recognized by the Guinness Book of World Records as the heaviest baby ever born. For Anna, the loss was unbearable. 2 children, 2 funerals. The weight of that grief was heavier than any burden she had ever carried. She fell into a deep depression, retreating from public life and abandoning her once bright stage career. The world that once stared in awe now watched her disappear from view. She tried briefly to return to the circus, but the joy was gone. The sparkle had dimmed. Anna had faced many challenges in her life: loneliness, stares, physical hardship. But this pain? This was different. It wasn't something she could rise above. It stayed with her, reshaping the rest of her days in quiet, lasting sorrow. The end of a remarkable life. In the spring of 1888, just one day before her 42nd birthday, Anna Haining Bates passed away in her sleep. The official cause was heart failure, brought on by complications from tuberculosis and thyroid disease. Conditions made worse by the long-term strain her body had endured. Her life, marked by towering height, immense compassion, and quiet strength, came to a gentle end in the home she had built with Martin. Her death was felt deeply in her community and by all who had known her. Martin, devastated but faithful to her memory, erected a monument at her gravesite. A year later, he remarried and moved to accommodate his new wife. But he made sure that when his own time came, he would be buried beside Anna and their son, forever connected to the love and the life they had shared. Today, Anna is remembered not only for her size, but for her story. In Seville, Ohio, a local museum holds artifacts and memories of her life. And in Halifax, Nova Scotia, a museum dedicated to her legacy is maintained with the help of her descendants, preserving the journey of a woman who lived through spectacle, survived tragedy, and still managed to inspire those around her. So, what do you take away from Anna's story? Her resilience? Her kindness? Her strength in the face of grief? Thanks for watching. If this shocked or moved you, let us know in the comments. Did we miss a story? There's more history hidden beneath the surface, so check out the rest of our series, and don't forget to subscribe and share Past Not Past with someone who loves uncovering the untold truth.